In the canon of 20th century design, Eileen Gray occupies a rare place. She was a pioneer who moved between art, furniture, and architecture. Her work stands beside that of Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe, yet, for decades, her name was nearly forgotten. When she began designing in Paris at the turn of the century, the modern movement did not yet exist. By the time it took shape, she had already anticipated many of its ideas and had reshaped them in her own way. Gray's story is not only about innovation, it's about persistence, independence, and the quiet radicalism of a woman designing in a world that rarely acknowledged her. Eileen Gray was born in 1878 on her family's estate at Brownswood in County Wexford, Ireland. Her father was a painter, and the family's connection to art gave her an early awareness of aesthetics, while her mother, a baroness, expected her to live according to Victorian convention. As a young woman, Gray resisted that expectation. In 1898, she entered the Slade School of Fine Art in London, one of the few art schools then open to women. She studied painting and drawing, but quickly became fascinated by materials and surface and how they interacted with texture and color. At the turn of the century, design in Britain was dominated by the arts and crafts movement, led by figures such as William Morris. Gray admired its emphasis on craftsmanship, but sought a more restrained, rational direction. In 1902, she traveled to Paris, a decision that would come to define the rest of her career. Paris, at the beginning of the 20th century, was a melting pot of ideas. The city was a home to the Art Nouveau movement, where design, architecture, and decoration merged into what some would consider works of art. Gray rented a small apartment in the Rue Bonaparte and enrolled at the Académie Colarossi and later at the École des Arts Décoratifs, studying under teachers who encouraged independence and unique perspectives. During this time, she encountered the art of Japanese lacquer, introduced by Seizo Sugawara, a craftsman from Tokyo. Gray persuaded Sugawara to take her on as a student. For years, she apprenticed in his workshop, learning the difficult process of applying and polishing layers of lacquer, a technique that demanded patience and precision. This discipline shaped her approach to design: attention to detail, sensitivity to process, and a belief that beauty lay in restraint. She spent nearly 2 decades perfecting this craft, during a time when few Europeans and very few women practiced it professionally. By the 1910s, Gray began exhibiting her lacquer work in Parisian galleries. Her screens and cabinets combined the sensuality of Art Nouveau with geometric order that foreshadowed modernism. Critics described them as objects of silence, neither painting nor furniture. She opened a small workshop in 1910, producing custom pieces for wealthy clients. One of her early patrons was Jacques Doucet, a fashion designer and collector of avant-garde art. Doucet's support allowed her to expand her work into furniture and interior decoration. Unfortunately, World War I interrupted her progress. Gray returned briefly to London and drove an ambulance for the war effort. When the conflict ended, she returned to Paris, determined to rebuild her career in a world now eager for a new start. In 1922, Eileen Gray opened Jean Dessert, a gallery and design studio on Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honoré. The name, a fictional male identity, helped her navigate a market that often dismissed women designers. Jean Dessert became a showcase for her furniture, rugs, lighting, and interior concepts. The gallery's minimal display, built from white walls and simple arrangements, reflected a radical new aesthetic in post-war Paris. Her designs from this period marked the transition from Art Deco to modernism. She replaced ornament with structure, using tubular steel, glass, and lacquered wood. Pieces such as the brick screen and adjustable table E1027 combined elegance with logical and rational design. Gray described her goal as the union of usefulness and beauty, the ideal of modern life. Clients included collectors, artists, and architects intrigued by her precision and imagination. Although she rarely sought publicity, her influence quietly grew among avant-garde circles. During the 1920s, Gray became acquainted with the De Stijl movement in the Netherlands and the Bauhaus in Germany. She studied their publications and absorbed their ideas of modular design and the machine aesthetic, but she never adopted them uncritically. Where De Stijl pursued abstraction, Gray focused on real-world function. Where the Bauhaus championed industry, she preserved craft. She began collaborating with Romanian architect Jean Bottavici, editor of the avant-garde journal L'Architecture Vivante. Through Bottavici, she encountered architects like Le Corbusier and Gerrit Rietveld, whose experiments in spatial purity resonated with her own search for clarity. Bottavici encouraged Gray to explore architecture directly. For her, it was not a change of profession, but a natural extension of her furniture design. If a chair was a structure for the body, a house could be a structure for living. Between 1926 and 1929, Gray designed and built her first house, E1027, located on a rocky hillside in Roquebrune Cap Martin on the French Riviera. The name was an encryption of her relationship with Bottavici, E for Eileen, 10 for J, the 10th letter, 2 for B, and 7 for G. E1027 was conceived as a retreat and exploration of what she considered the future of housing. Gray designed it almost entirely herself, though officially it was credited to Bottavici, whose role was largely supportive. The house exemplified modernist principles: open plan, flat roof, white facade, yet with a warmth absent from much of the movement. Its proportions were defined by human scale, giving the home consistent forms and an inherent sense of humanity. Every element was designed with care: adjustable tables, built-in storage, pivoting screens, and furniture that changed function depending on the moment. The layout blurred the line between inside and outside, using terraces and long windows to frame the sea. E1027 was a space designed for movement, rest, and light. Gray described it as a living organism in harmony with its environment. When completed in 1929, E1027 was quietly revolutionary. Its synthesis of architecture and furniture embodied ideas the international style would later claim as its own. Critics praised the house in L'Architecture Vivante and other journals, but its significance was soon overshadowed. Gray was a woman working outside established networks, and the architectural world largely ignored her authorship, crediting much of the design to Bottavici. Worse still, in the 1930s, Le Corbusier, who admired the house, painted large murals on its white walls, uninvited. He described them as gifts, but Gray saw them as acts of violation, a malassertion over her space. The murals changed the character of the house and symbolized the marginalization she experienced within the modernist canon. In later years, these events would become emblematic of how women's contributions to modernism were obscured or almost entirely absorbed by their male contemporaries. After E1027, Gray designed another house nearby, Tempe a Pailla, for herself. Smaller and more introspective, it refined the lessons of E1027 with greater economy. The name, from a local dialect meaning time for nothing, captured her desire for solitude and reflection. Tempe a Pailla used folding partitions, compact kitchens, and terraces that extended into the landscape. It was architecture as a living system rather than a static form. By the mid-1930s, Gray withdrew from public life. The modernist establishment was dominated by men, and her independence offered little institutional support. She continued to draw, paint, and experiment in private, but her name faded largely from public view. Unfortunately, World War II scattered her archives and destroyed parts of her earlier work. For nearly 20 years, her contributions remained largely forgotten, mentioned only in passing histories of modern design. When the war ended, Gray returned to Paris and quietly resumed her work. designing furniture and interiors for private clients. By then, a younger generation of architects and designers had begun rediscovering her early work. Her emphasis on flexibility, lightness, and human scale felt newly relevant in a world recovering from industrial excess. Still, she rarely granted interviews or sought exhibitions. Her focus remained on the act of design itself, a private dialogue between material, function, and feeling. By the 1950s, Eileen Gray was in her 70s and living quietly in southern France. She worked in near seclusion, restoring her houses and designing new furniture. She was entirely unconcerned with fame. Most of her earlier work was unfortunately lost, sold, or otherwise scattered. The international design community, focused on industrial mass production and corporate modernism, had almost entirely forgotten her. However, within a small circle of architects and collectors, her reputation began to re-emerge. Design historian Joseph Reichwart encountered her work in Paris and recognized its beauty and originality. Younger designers, many reacting against the impersonal quality of post-war architecture, found Gray's work a model of sensitivity and freedom. In 1968, critic Joseph Reichwart published a major article on her in Domus magazine, edited by Joseph Minari. That feature sparked a renewed interest in her work and life story. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Eileen Gray's name appeared alongside other great innovators of modernism. Interest grew rapidly after the Domus article. Collectors began searching for her surviving furniture, and museums sought examples of her lacquer screens and tubular steel tables. By then, she was 94 years old, living in a modernist apartment in Paris. When journalists asked about her career, she offered little commentary. "The future projects itself through the past," she said simply. Her rediscovery coincided with a broader reassessment of modernism. The rigid functionalism of mid-century design had given way to new interest in emotion, craftsmanship, and identity, qualities Gray had championed from the beginning. Throughout her life, Eileen Gray resisted strict categories. She moved easily between artisan and architect, between the decorative and the structural. Her work reveals a continuous thread of ideas rather than a series of stylistic shifts. At the heart of her philosophy was functional freedom. She believed that design should accommodate change and movement, an idea expressed in her adjustable furniture and flexible interiors. A room, she argued, should be an instrument for living, not just a monument to a particular ideology. Her materials, lacquer, chrome, cork, linen, and steel, were chosen not for symbolism, but for sensory balance. A soft surface beside a hard one, a curve beside a line, created tension and release. Even in her most minimal designs, she sought comfort and tactility. In contrast to many male modernists, Gray's functionalism was more biological than mechanical. She often compared design to anatomy, each part related to the body, responding to movement, touch, and need. Gray's architectural approach, developed through E1027 and Tempe Pailla, anticipated many ideas later associated with user-centered design. She designed for lived experience. Her plans were fluid, with sliding partitions and adaptable spaces. She rejected the rigid symmetry of Le Corbusier's machine for living in favor for what she called a house that allowed life to unfold naturally. In her notebooks, she wrote, "A house is not a machine to live in. It is the shell of man, his extension, his release, his spiritual emanation." This statement captures her difference from the mainstream of modernism. Where others saw architecture as technology, she saw it as psychology, a space that could shape emotion. Eileen Gray's career cannot be separated from her experience as a woman in early 20th century Europe. Architecture was a male-dominated field, and critics often framed her achievements as anomalies rather than evidence of equal talent. She never joined feminist movements and rarely spoke publicly about gender, yet her independence was itself a radical act. By opening Jean Désert under a male pseudonym, she confronted the barriers of her time with quiet pragmatism. Her refusal to conform, professionally or personally, allowed her to design without allegiance to any movement or school. She collaborated with men, but was never defined by them, even when figures like Le Corbusier attempted to absorb her achievements into their own narrative. In retrospect, her career reads as a lesson in autonomy, that creative freedom depends on the ability to stand apart. While Gray lived in relative obscurity, her house fell into disrepair. After Bottevici's death in 1956, E1027 passed through several owners. Le Corbusier's murals remained controversial reminders of both admiration and appropriation. By the 1990s, the building was near ruin, damaged by vandalism and neglect. Architectural historians and preservationists began campaigns to restore it, recognizing its importance as one of the earliest examples of human-scaled modern architecture. Restoration efforts, led by the French government and the Cap Moderne Association, took decades. By 2021, E1027 was fully restored and open to the public. Today, it stands not only as a landmark of modernism, but as a symbol of Gray's perseverance. In addition to the restoration of her architecture, there was a rediscovery of her furniture. During the 1970s and 1980s, galleries such as the Galerie Jean Desbois and later the Galerie Patrick Séguin began collecting and reissuing her designs. The adjustable table E1027, the Bibendum chair, and the Transit Lounge became sought-after classics. Each piece remains as functional and relevant today as it was in 1929. As with many modernist-era works, they have truly withstood the test of time. Manufacturers like Classicism and RM Designs secured rights to reproduce her work, ensuring her designs reached new audiences. Museums, including the Centre Pompidou, the V&A, and the Museum of Modern Art, acquired her pieces for their permanent collections. What had once been niche now defined a lineage of timeless design. Even into her 90s, Eileen Gray continued to draw, paint, and design. Her later sketches reveal a mind still exploring proportion and space with undiminished curiosity. She resisted the idea of legacy. When asked about her influence, she replied, "It is better to be a complete secret than a second-rate success." Her humility concealed deep conviction. To her, design was an ongoing experiment, never complete and never fashionable. Each project, whether a table hinge or a building plan, was a question about how people live and how objects serve them. Eileen Gray died in 1976 at the age of 98, largely unaware that her work would soon be celebrated around the world. After her death, exhibitions and publications began to situate her within the history of modernism. In 1979, the Victoria and Albert Museum held a major retrospective, confirming her as one of the key figures bridging Art Deco and the international style. Scholars and curators reassessed E1027 not as a footnote to Le Corbusier, but as a pivotal movement in 20th century architecture. The house's integration of built-in furniture, modular planning, and human comfort anticipated later developments in interior architecture and sustainable design. By the 2000s, films, books, and documentaries introduced her to wider audiences. Her life's narrative, innovation followed by obscurity and rediscovery, became emblematic of how women's work had been written out of design history. The restored E1027 opened permanently to visitors, ensuring that her vision could be experienced directly rather than interpreted through others. Looking across Eileen Gray's career, a pattern emerges. She began as a craftswoman, mastering ancient lacquer, moved into modern furniture, and ended as an architect designing spatial experiences. What unites these stages is her belief that design is a continuum, a single creative act that can scale from a hinge to a house. This idea parallels later thinkers like Charles and Ray Eames, but Gray reached it independently decades earlier. Her work anticipated the interdisciplinary approach of contemporary design practice, where architecture, product, and user experience intersect. Possibly Gray's greatest contribution to design lays in how she humanized modernism. She rejected both the ornament of the 19th century and the cold rigidity of the 20th. Instead, she forged her own path, pulling from both worlds along the way. She once wrote, "To create, one must first question everything." That spirit of inquiry defines her legacy more than any single object. Today, she is recognized as one of the central figures of modern design. Her influence extends beyond architecture and furniture into broader ideas about user-centered design and gender in the creative practice. Designers such as Zaha Hadid, Kazuo Sajima, and Patricia Urquiola cite her as an inspiration for integrating sensual form with functional logic. Her fluid movement between disciplines prefigured many of today's cross-disciplinary studios where boundaries between art, craft, and architecture blur. Her rediscovery helped expand the modernist canon, showing that the history of design is richer and more diverse than the narratives dominated by men. Eileen Gray's career spanned almost the entire modern era, from the dawn of electric light to the early days of digital design. Across that century of change, she remained remarkably consistent, designing not for ideology, but for life. Her work reminds us that progress in design is not measured by speed or spectacle, but by sensitivity and the ability to understand how people inhabit space and time. This has been an essay on Eileen Gray. If you guys enjoyed this, it would mean a lot if you would like the video and subscribe if you're interested in more. And I really appreciate you taking the time to watch it. Thank you.